partly I think you have to go in with
Makes
some
sense.
confidence about here's what I can bring. But to me, the balance of confidence and humility are really important. And so you have to, I think as a leader, show confidence, show you come in with a point of view, and you have some fresh perspectives. That's why you were hired.
Hello, everyone. So we're starting here another VTEX podcast. First, I wanted to thank our sponsor, AWS, for this episode. I'm very excited to welcome here today Mary Dillon. So Mary Dillon has been the CEO of Foot Locker and previously led Ulta Beauty for nearly a decade, which had a ton of growth and growth of the store base, turning it in a huge success and one of the largest beauty retailers in the United States. She's been one of the few executives who's led 2 Fortune 500 companies in very different moments. So one during growth and another during a turnaround. So welcome, Mary, to the podcast.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So I wanted to start with the transition, right? Because you participated in 2 different companies, one in growth stage and then another in turnaround. Like, what made you make that decision to move to Foot Locker and to take that turnaround challenge?
Well, Alex, I would say that was the most often asked question when I first did that was, how did you decide that? You know, what's interesting is that when I retired from Ulta Beauty, I actually wasn't planning to run another company because I felt great about what we accomplished and the leadership team that was ready to come in and take over for me. And then I realized after a while that I kind of missed retail.
I see.
I miss leading an organization and maybe having one thing to really focus on. And so when the Foot Locker opportunity came to me, I knew it'd be challenging, but I also knew that there were things that I could apply from what I learned before, and also a lot that I could learn. And so you're right. I mean, Ulta Beauty I didn't know when I first started there in 2013 how much growth we could achieve. And that was a great growth story. And that has its own sets of opportunities and challenges. And Foot Locker was at a different moment, a great company with a great history. But during a period of some transition through the lens of supplier relationships and the industry. So, but I'll tell you what, it was really a very fun 3 years. And I have a great sneaker collection. And I've learned that we can wear sneakers with everything.
And what do you think is what is the biggest difference between leading a growth environment, a growth stage company, and leading a turnaround type challenge? What are the biggest differences in your opinion?
I'm sure I would call Foot Locker a turnaround.
I see.
But it was definitely, first of all, stepping back, we have multiple banners and it's a global company.
I see.
So that one big difference already was that it was global. Ulta Beauty is going global now, and Foot Locker operates as that banner all around the world. But we also had Kids Foot Locker, Champs Sporting Goods, another banner called WSS based in Japan. So every part of the business was a little bit different. As you know now, it's owned by Dick's Sporting Goods, which is exciting because I think they're excited to help continue to grow the business into the future. But probably the biggest difference between the two, I learned a bit in retrospect, which is at Ulta Beauty, we had many, over 500 brands on any given day that we sold in many subcategories. So, hair care, makeup, skincare, services. And so when things naturally ebb and flow, like say if makeup is strong or maybe skincare is weak or the opposite, they can kind of balance each other out.
Makes sense.
When I got into the footwear industry, really it's a much smaller number of brands. Much smaller. And so really it's Nike and Adidas. And then after that, there's other very important brands, but they're smaller by comparison, right? Hoka and On and Puma. So the challenging thing is when you have just a few brands, you're a little bit more beholden to where that brand is on their cycle, both in terms of your relationship and their growth trajectory. But I feel like, the main thing that I was able to apply initially when I got to Foot Locker was understanding what we had accomplished in loyalty, e-commerce, and store improvements at Ulta Beauty was a key priority for us at the beginning.
Makes a lot of sense. Diving into retail trends, and you talked about a little bit about dependency on key brands. We saw, or in the recent past, but maybe that's changing now. Some of these brands wanting to go D2C, and how did you challenge that? How did you manage that challenge at your time at Foot Locker, and how do you see that in generally speaking to the role of retail, given that some brands want to go D2C?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot changing in the world today for retailers and for everybody. The notion of going direct to consumer versus being part of a multi-brand retail environment, I would say, first of all, it depends a bit on the consumer category. So, and what we have learned, I've learned this across a couple of retail companies, whether it was in beauty or whether it was in athletic footwear, our customers were really interested in innovation and newness and participating across multiple brands, right? When you think about it in sneakers, we had a group of people that we call the fashion forward enthusiasts. So some folks who looked at sneakers as just part of their wardrobe. And for them, collecting new and interesting and innovative, they weren't as tied to just one brand as the look that they wanted to create for themselves. So a brand, if they only sell directly to consumer, can miss the opportunity for consumers who are actually looking for a multiple branded environment. Okay. And so while, a retailer can't control if somebody wants to only sell direct to consumer, it seems like the best model for certain categories is to do both, to have your DTC, site, but also participate in the retailers. It's just a different consumer occasion. And I think it helps you grow more. Same thing in beauty. There's very few beauty users who want just one brand of one thing, that they want to try everything, right? So again, probably every brand we had a direct to consumer site, but coming into Ulta Beauty, and then same would be true of Foot Locker, you're opening up an aperture for more growth. The other thing I would add is that these are two categories where people want to shop online and they want to shop in person. Okay. Brick and mortar retail is not going away.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge is how do you keep it innovative and fresh and relevant and differentiated? But there's going to be folks who think about shoes. They want to come in, they want to see what fits. They want to try it on. In the case of Foot Locker, get advice from our stripers who are real experts in trend and style. So that can't be replaced by just shopping online.
And do you have some thoughts over the new consumer, the Gen Z consumer? Does that change anything or in your experience in how retail operates, especially this dynamic of online, direct to consumer and brick and mortar retail? How do you think about this new consumer base?
Well, I've been in the consumer world in business for over 40 years. Okay. I started really on the brand side in the food industry, and then I moved into restaurant and in telecommunications, and then ultimately the last two retail companies. And if there's one thing I know, you always have to stay on top of understanding how the consumer is changing, and not just demographically, although that is important, but also psychographically. How is their mindset changing? How do they think about the category that you're trying to participate in? And it starts with the youngest consumers for most, not all categories, but certainly in things like fashion, footwear, and beauty, trends are set by the youngest consumers. So I always advise my executives, you better have teenagers in your life that you talk to a lot. Because they're going to tell you what's cool, what's not. Of course, we do our own market research, but there's nothing that can replace understanding the mindset, because when you intersect every year that now consumers become consumers, the role of digital in their lives is dramatically different than even was 5 years ago than it was 10 years ago. So how do you understand how to take that and be a great brand, be a great company in the context where they're being bombarded by a lot of things? So again, I would say Gen Z loves shopping in person and they love shopping online. And they love every form of social media, and they're now going to have their own shopping agents, right? They're going to have their own AI agents. So all the principles that ever applied are even more important today, which is you better be differentiated. You better have products that can't be gotten everywhere else, but you also better have really strong operations, like great data, great supply chain visibility, great personalization, because when those agentic shoppers go out and start doing some of the replenishment, you have to compete to win, but you better have more than just that, because if you're only competing on price and availability, that's not a road to growth and margin. So
Yes, yeah. So basically, it's having that feedback loop closely on what's going on with your customer base to be able to act. And that the principles haven't really changed, right? The principles of how
the principles of how you think about the consumer, and how you make an assumption that no matter what you're doing today, it's not going to continue to work exactly that way in the future. So being willing to be objective. And also being willing to really look at what your competitors are doing. So sometimes I think we get too in our bubble, we're great and we got this, right? Or we're living in our own little world and we don't really understand how the world operates and how consumers live. So again, those principles about understanding the consumer, the competitive environment, and change, I think have applied always, but maybe more important today than ever.
Perfect. Now, I'm curious to go into a little bit of your leadership management style. And one of the key things I see about like senior leaders is being able to make decisions without full information, which is like the most common thing. And like, how do you think about making decisions without having like the full context of information or or with a lot of uncertainty?
Yeah, Alex, that's such a great question. I mean, I'd say I never probably ever in my business career felt like anything was black and white.
Yeah.
And I would say today, the pace of change is going to make that more the case. Okay. So I'd say in my mind, there's three things that I do. First is that I've learned after leading many teams, that if I have a team that works for me, that are people that each have great functional expertise, but also are willing to, collaborate with each other and push and pull problems together through the lens of our total enterprise, I do feel like if you work with a group of people like that, we can solve almost anything, because I encourage people to be open and honest, share their perspectives, but then when we come to a decision, we all have to align to go do it. To me, that's different than I have all the answers and I'm going to go tell each group what to do.
Makes sense.
I'd like to say I have all the answers, but guess what? I don't think anybody does. So first, I think that insulate you from making bad decisions is having a cabinet of people that are going to help you make sure you're making good decisions who are not self-interested for their own function, but they're solving for the enterprise. Second thing is just a simple, mapping out of what's the upside, what's the downside, and really trying to take into consideration qualitatively and quantitatively what are the upsides, but what are the risks, And the last thing I have to say is intuition. And so sometimes many times after all that said, my gut tells me X. And if I didn't follow my gut, I learned once or twice that was a bad idea, because usually my gut, because of years of experience. So it's the last place I go. You see what I mean? I don't start with my gut first because I don't have all the answers. See Exhibit A. But once I get down to it, then I feel like my experience, my intuition are kind of a last check for me.
Makes sense. Like creating that environment where you can harness like information feeding to you, so you can like enhance your decision making, having the framework of risk, like, because I guess the more risk, the more you have to think about it, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, there's certainly not every decision needs that much, time to agitate. But again, I go back to, for me, it's about having great leaders working for me who want to work in that way and understand the value of collaboration. Because, somebody might come to me with a solution for, say, a supply chain issue that might sound great on paper, but then if it maybe has a big impact on how the stores are going to operate, and maybe I didn't think to ask that question. If I said, yes, let's go do that, then all of a sudden the store team's like, wait, this changes everything about how we bring product. You see what I mean? So that's where I rely on the functional experts to work across their silos and with me to say, let's just think through all the stakeholders and all the angles. So.
And I wanted to go into like tough decision making, right? I believe, like basically your 40 year career, how do you make those really difficult decisions, like such as closing stores or having to go through layoffs, like in these times of uncertainty? Like, how do you navigate these difficult decisions?
Yeah, well, it's always, more fun to be in a growing environment than not. But you learn as an executive, as a leader, the most important thing you need to do is to think through the lens of all of your stakeholders. So certainly your number one is employees in these kind of situations, but you also have shareholders, investors. And so to a certain extent, like I have to balance that as a CEO, because as much as I really, of course, care for and really respect and want to take care of our employees, if there's a business decision that has to be made that is the right thing for the long term for the company and the investors, that's what we have to balance. Then it's about how do you do any kind of changes that impact people with as much care as you can. And that's everything from, when we've had to close Ulta Beauty stores during the pandemic, like every retailer did, I made sure that we gave ourselves a little bit of a grace period to continue to pay our store employees until I was sure they were set up to receive government benefits to get them through, because the thought of them having no paycheck overnight, I just couldn't live with that. Now we have the balance sheet to be able to do that. But even it's at a minimum, it's about transparent communication, trying to put resources to your employees as you can, but also knowing that when you're the CEO, sometimes you have to make those harder choices.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I guess the being transparent and being upfront and having integrity, it goes a long way. Like people, and being authentic, right? It goes a long way. People can feel that you're making the best possible decision in for the best interest of the business.
Yes,
right?
and I would say it takes some time to build that trust, and still you're not always going to make everybody happy, and that's what's hard sometimes.
And in your experience, what's the hardest thing about change management at scale? And
change management at scale is always about human openness and aperture and appetite for change, right? So, I'd say that people can be on a whole continuum of some who want to change constantly and some who are really resistant to change, and then most people kind of in the middle. So I'd say it really is about painting the vision and the case for why change is going to matter and why it's going to be helpful. And again, I can't do that alone. So I need to make sure that I have leaders and that they have leaders who know how to lead with that kind of authenticity, patience, and teaching. Not everybody's going to be happy. And there's some people who maybe don't want to change and they're maybe not in the right environment. But I think it's, in fact, the most important thing is a set of context that we have to constantly change. I mean, even at our best times at Ulta, I was like, something's around the corner. Nobody's stopping. We compete against everybody who sells beauty everywhere. They're not sitting around folding up their cards and going home. So we better, keep changing.
But it's almost like a muscle that you have to build, right? That takes some time to make folks but I agree with what you're saying makes a lot of sense. If you create this muscle of people being comfortable with change constantly, how do you build that muscle in practice?
Yeah, I think you just have to model it, but there's also, you don't want to change everything. The phrase, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So knowing what are the aspects of the culture, the people, or the business that need to stay because they're working pretty damn well.
Makes
and then
sense.
It's also good to just experiment, so when you can pilot things or try things or test things, then you can reduce the risk. You can signal to the organization that things might look a little bit different once you figure out what the success formula is going to be.
Makes sense. I've read that you're quite a people-centric leader and an empathetic leader. How do you balance this being people-centric and empathetic with tough decision making and how does that balance work out for you?
Well, I'd say after having been at this for a long time, I got better at trying to strike that balance, because the part of me that's never going to go away is that, I'm somebody who, I know a lot of people like this, so I wouldn't say I'm so unique, but I do come from a background where I'm a first generation college graduate. I put myself through college. I worked every job possibly known to man part-time before I got into my professional career. I mean, I'm exaggerating slightly, but drugstore, waitressing, babysitting, tutoring, cleaning apartments, right? So inherently, and having had those jobs, I really know that the folks who really are on the front line of every business, are most critical, because that's where most of the commerce is happening. They have a lot of good insight if you just ask them, and they are to be respected and treasured. And so that part of me is not going to go away. But so learning how to harness the power of our folks in our stores or distribution centers to have them have a voice, have them feel heard. But I also know that I can't give everybody everything they want. Again, balancing being a CEO, delivering the financials, having our investors in mind. And so again, I would just say, trying to create an environment where leaders really lead with values, similar values and authenticity, and really respect, that we're transparent as we can, and just know that sometimes we have to make hard decisions. But on its best day, I think, in an organization, when I can have people say to me, hey, I really felt seen, I really felt heard, thank you for taking the suggestion, that means a lot, because I think, that's the best we can do on our best days as leaders.
And then basically what you're saying it makes it easier for people to understand the difficult decisions because of this authenticity. Basically, what you're saying for me, I'm reading like authenticity, right?
Yeah, and I also think you're trying to signal that change might be coming or might need to come. But again, it's still not a perfect science because at the end of the day, these are people's jobs and their livelihoods. So again, it's better to be in a position where you're growing and hiring and, continuing to be able to have that kind of, feeling in terms of the culture.
Interesting. Another question, which is about like moving companies. Like I guess you just mentioned that you've been like so many experiences. Like when you're taking on a new company, a new role, a new job, like or a new challenge, like how do you think about that? Like do you like how what is your mindset? Like do you think about like do I need to change something like or how do you think, well, like do you have a framework on like taking on new challenges?
Well, I'd say I learned as I went a little bit, and part of the reason I moved jobs was frankly, I grew up in the Chicago area. My husband and I, have 4 children and lots of family, and I kind of wanted to keep growing my career, but also stay in one city for the most part. So it's partly why I first started to kind of look to move. Maybe I felt like I had to try. Also, I knew that I love learning, and I'm pretty adaptable in new situations. But I'd say that I also got a lot more savvy about this because I think the first time I left, I was at Quaker Oats, and that then was acquired by PepsiCo. And so I was an executive at both of those companies, very different cultures. And I felt like I could adapt and learn, bring the best of what I have from the Quaker days and learn from the PepsiCo days, but still within a context of an industry where I'd say they were fairly similar. When I first went like to McDonald's, where I was a global head of marketing for 5 years, that was the first time I went to a totally new industry. And I was a little bit naive. I thought, gosh, they wanted me here. I'm at a pretty senior level. They must like the experience I'm bringing and the ideas. And I went in with maybe more, I came in a little hot on change, on certain things I thought we could change. And I was pretty humbled by that because I realized at first, okay, wait a minute. You're here from the outside. You didn't grow up in the company like most people did. There's history, there's, traditions and customs. And just because I see the world in a certain way doesn't mean I can just waltz in and wave a magic wand and make it so. Even at a C-suite level, you might think like, oh, you're a global head of marketing. There are still factors and forces in companies that are very strong. And even as a CEO, sometimes you have to be like, how do I think about how much change? So I would say that was a good experience for me to go, okay, let me step back and say, let me appreciate what's working. Let me try to find different ways to build a case for some of the things I think we could do better. One of my big initiatives was making the Happy Meal around the world healthier for kids. And I needed to build a case for that and take the time to really bring folks along and get support before we were really able to get traction. So that helped me learn. When my first CEO job was at US Cellular, and that was an industry that clearly I was new to. I think what they liked about bringing me in was a consumer mindset. Again, differentiating that way, leadership and culture. But I would say there I really took a pace to make sure I learned as much as I could about the business. And I didn't go in there with a change agenda. And same thing with Ulta Beauty. When I got there, what I realized was not so much that it needs to change, but we are sitting on something that could be made much bigger, I thought. We could create something that's much bigger than the products that we sell today. So each situation, but certainly there's changes you have to make, and you just have to balance it. As a CEO, I think you have a little more latitude to make changes faster. Maybe you're expected to, but you also don't want to change things too fast until you understand the business. So,
of course,
balancing act.
Yeah, learning, and like I guess what I'm hearing here as well is like people need to feel that you've learned, like that you understand, that you're like you have sort of the same context that they have, so that you have the credibility to actually start to make some changes. Because if they don't feel, if like the people you're leading don't feel you have the full like they're not like you have the full context that they have, then it's like you don't have the credibility yet to lead and make change. Is that how
yes, but it's such a balancing act because when you're going in at a pretty senior level, I'd say a couple things. One is there's probably people inside the company who thought they should have had that job. So partly they're testing you to say, what makes you so special? Why did our CEO think you should come in and do this? So there's a bit of what do you got?
That's
like, you know
true.
what I mean? So partly I think you have to go in with some confidence about here's what I can bring. But to me, the balance of confidence and humility are really important. And so you have to, I think as a leader, show confidence, show you come in with a point of view, and you have some fresh perspectives. That's why you were hired, right? But I think also, as I say, take a beat, learn, talk to people, just get to know folks, get to know what's on their mind. What do they think is working and not working? And I always would say, I don't have to be an expert in everything because I don't think I ever could be. I have people that work for me that are, but I should really understand the culture, the people, and what people see are the key issues before I come in too hot. So it's a balancing act.
But when you join a company, you usually you haven't hired the people that are working for you, correct?
Yes.
Like how and like the trustworthiness and the building that trust is a two-way street, right?
Yeah.
Like folks need to trust you, but you need to also trust them. Like how, but it's sometimes the team that you've inherited in a sense, like maybe was not like how do you deal with that? It's like, and especially if there's like a culture mismatch from how you previously believed like how your previous work culture and the new work culture. That's always like something difficult for me. It's a lot easier when you've hired everybody and you've been to the company for like 20 years, and then it's like you've been in this position but like when you move to a new job and you all of a sudden you have 30 people working for you that you haven't hired, it's like it seems incredibly more difficult. Like
yes. Do you have like 3 hours? We could do this for a while. No, I'd say at a high level, you're spot on. And again, I think I learned as I went on this. I would say ideally, if you go into a company and you've got a team of people working for you, ideally it's a perfect fit from the start, right? That would be wonderful because if they shared your system of values and how you thought about the business, they bring all this expertise and knowledge and history. So, to a certain extent, I don't go into a new situation saying, I know I'm going to change everything, okay? Having said that, what I learned is that quite often you will find that you're probably going to have to make some changes. And maybe the most important thing I learned to do is to be very clear and transparent about what I'm looking for in my leaders. And when I figured out how to communicate that, what I try to do is be clear up front and then see how it went for a while. And then if I decided somebody wasn't really going to fit that, at least they knew what was on my mind. You know what I mean?
Makes sense.
And sometimes maybe I come in with one or two people that I know have certain expertise that I need.
Makes sense.
But the way I define this is just like each leader working for me, I think needs to have the functional expertise that, you need at the highest level. So if it's supply chain or merchandising or marketing, finance, I'm not an expert in everything. So I want people to be expert at their field, but also be people that can think through the lens of the enterprise. So not just through their functional silo, but sometimes understand that there's trade-offs across these functions to make the best decisions for the enterprise. And this won't surprise you to hear, people who believe in the power of collaboration.
Yes,
so I call it like just three things: functional expertise, enterprise thinking, collaboration, with a foundation underneath that about respect. Okay. I don't often talk about the respect part. I more just want to see how that plays out. Because you know what I mean? Like I just want to see how people treat people. But so when I'm clear about that, and when I have a team that has all those things together, I think is when I'm at my very best as a CEO. Some people might have the functional expertise, but not really be able to know how to think through the enterprise. Maybe they grew up in corporate America, always fighting for their department or their function, right? That's a hard habit to break. Some people might be great at collaboration, but maybe they aren't as great at their function. So to me, it's about putting that mosaic together and being transparent with people, and not doing it too quickly, but also not waiting too long.
Makes a lot of sense. No, that's very, very interesting.
That's chapter 3 of the next podcast.
One final question is, so today's world, like the transformation is just going such at a high speed especially with AI. Do you have one last final piece of advice for business leaders in the face of this incredibly fast-paced transformational environment?
Yes. Well, don't think it's not going to keep changing. Make sure that you are, building your own chatbots. Make sure you're spending time with young people who are really using AI every single day. Most people here probably are. But I think in retail in particular, it's almost like go back to the stuff that was important and know that it's going to be even more important today. And I might have touched on this, but like when you have these agentic shoppers out there, right? AI agents that can be used, they're going to be out there looking for the lowest price, the quickest delivery. They don't care about brand. They don't care about loyalty, but that's going to be important. And so companies need to have, great data, great visible inventory information, great personalization, great pricing. But then they also better make sure that they have other things about their total business proposition that are still differentiating. So loyalty program, great in-person experience, exclusivity on some brands, because it's too easy for things to be solved for. We don't care about loyalty anymore when we're just looking at that level. I think you have to do both. So I'd say the principles that were important about differentiation, understanding your competition and your consumer are going to be more important than ever. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much
absolutely.
for being here. It was,
was
a
fun.
pleasure.
Great interview.
All right. Yeah. Learned a lot
Great.
being a values-based leader and
Excellent.
being transparent and humble. So yeah,
Thank
learned
you.
a lot. Thank you so much.
It was really fun. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.